All right, well, today the inquiry into nuclear energy gets underway following calls for a committee to look at whether nuclear energy was feasible for Australia, suitable and politically palatable, I have to say. Now, there's division in the Labor Party. As I said, Joel Fitzgibbon calling for the opposition to match the government's emissions reduction targets. And last night on Jones and Credlin, we interviewed a dairy farmer out of Queensland. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to have to raise this with the National Party because his interview last night and the falling milk price, meaning he sent many of his cows to the slaughter, was harrowing stuff. And I know Keith Pitt's pretty vocal in his party room with the National Party. Let's see what he has to say about that and some other issues tonight. Joining me now is the federal member for Hinkler and very strong nuclear energy advocate, Keith Pitt. Keith, great to have you on the show. You kicked off day one of the inquiry today into nuclear energy, its feasibility for Australia. You're a former electrical engineer. I like to remind people before we start our interviews. How did the first day go?
Oh, we've had a couple of public inquiries in capital cities. In Sydney today, I don't think it could have been more broad-ranging, to be frank. We've got everything from people who say there's only one solution, and that's to cover the entire country with solar panels and wind turbines, right through to those who, I've got to say, are incredibly technically competent, qualified and experienced, saying we've just got to get out of the way. So, for those who are out there, the idealists that say nuclear is too dear, too dangerous, too hard, too difficult, well, why do you need the prohibition? It becomes purposeless. So I'm technology agnostic. I just want cheaper prices for the people I represent. I want a reliable supply. And right now we know we simply are not getting that. South Australia, that great experiment, demonstrates exactly what happens.
If we are serious about lowering emissions, and we can put that debate about whether it is the right move for our economy and whether or not man makes a huge contribution to emissions, put that to one side. If we are all on the page that emissions have to come down, and that's sort of the mantra from the left, if you were really in that camp, then what's your argument against nuclear? Because it's baseload power, it's zero emissions, not low emissions, it's zero emissions. And of course, we've got abundant uranium.
Well, I think this is the difference between realists and idealists. If you look at the technical arguments, well, quite simply, all the things that you get through an existing steam turbine-driven generator, which is run by coal, for example, or hydro, in terms of voltage control and frequency regulation and stuff that you need, can be provided through nuclear reactors that generate steam. They also give the opportunity for a huge boost to the local economy, for example. But the idealists tell us that it doesn't matter, that we don't have a waste disposal plan for solar panels, which contain cadmium and lead and heavy metals and a lot of other chemicals. It doesn't matter how much carbon dioxide you might produce to produce those said panels or wind turbines, or the fact they get replaced every 10 to 20 years. I mean, it's like trying to find a solution to a jigsaw puzzle with your eyes closed, your hands behind your back, and someone's pinched half the pieces. We quite simply have to look at every single option and what's in the best interest of the country.
Now, you tell me, I'm pretty cynical with these things. Is this inquiry about really charting a course forward for a sensible debate in Australia about nuclear, or is this just something that was thrown at you because you and a couple of other of your colleagues were noisy in the party room? This is a minor win for you and the inquiry will sit on the shelf like all the others.
Oh, well, we've said for a long time now we want to have a conversation with the Australian people. And there was some Morgan poll research out in recent days which indicated that they've really changed their views. There's 51% support, much stronger amongst men than it is amongst women in that most recent Morgan poll. And in fact, I think if there was an education program, people would quite simply change their mind. The younger generation, the evidence they've put forward is they're much more concerned about climate change and the world might catch on fire than they are about the risk of nuclear energy. And if that's the solution, well, they're happy to go with it. But I mean, we've seen such broad-ranging views. The idealists who want nothing to do with it also don't want their power price to increase. Those at the other end of the spectrum are happy for us quite simply to get out of the way. So it's a complex issue, but we have the states who have got off scot-free so far. They've been able to do what I think are just ridiculous things with their generation and transmission system and rely on other states for reliability and security, and I think that's got to stop.
In a little while, I'm going to talk to a submarine expert who's been banging the drum about the capability we should have, and he would argue we don't have for our new submarine acquisitions, the development in Australia, obviously, and the sustainment. And one of the issues today from the Chief of Navy, he has weighed in with an open mind about the current build of submarines migrating to nuclear. As you know, they are a French submarine that is currently produced in France as a nuclear version, retrofitted to make it a conventional sub for Australia. Now, I'm not asking you to be an expert on nuclear subs, but one of the arguments against a nuclear submarine industry in the country is that we don't have nuclear expertise, and often that comes hand in glove with nuclear energy expertise. Perhaps one of the arguments that's really pushed the left and others against nuclear defence assets is the fact they don't want it to be used for nuclear energy. Do you see there's any correlation in that argument, or do you see that this is something we should support?
Oh, well, the current inquiry is certainly not looking at defence capability into the future. But my understanding is the last boat under the current contract will be delivered in 2055, which is a very long way away. So we do have to keep an open mind on what the best opportunities are for our country. My understanding is it could take 10 to 12 years at a minimum to train the naval personnel to operate that type of boat, one which is nuclear powered. And I think if there's an opportunity to do that in the future, the sooner we start, the sooner we get the outcome is the reality. So I think we always have to keep an open mind as a federal parliamentarian. We should never rub out anything absolutely. And certainly the submissions we are getting is there's been substantial changes around SMR technology. There is a company called NewScale which has its books open right now. They're taking orders. And if we had a look at this type of technology, well, it certainly helps the economy. It builds our education sector much more strongly. We can look at manufacturing. It opens up a $10 billion resource in Queensland in terms of mining. So I think it's up to us to make those decisions.
Joel Fitzgibbon says that he should match you now on Labor's emissions targets. He thinks what they took to the election was very clearly rejected by the Australian people. Now, he's on the right of the Labor Party, but what do you say to his demand in a speech tonight, but certainly commentary today, that Labor should have a bipartisan approach on emissions reductions with the coalition?
Well, after 20 years, Joel's the rising star of the Labor Party. I think he should cut up his membership and come and join the Nats. I mean, I've heard comments from him recently that he wants a floor price for milk, so he wants to re-regulate the milk market. He's now a supporter of coal and coal generation in terms of electricity. And this current intervention, well, I hope they don't listen to him, Peter, because he's right. We went to the election with a very balanced proposition. The opposition took an uncosted policy based on ideology. They were rejected by the Australian people. If Labor doesn't change their mind, well, they'll stay in opposition, and long may it be so.
All right, last night on Jones and Credlin, we interviewed a dairy farmer. I have to say it was a pretty difficult message to hear from him. He and his family have been dairy farmers for 60 years in Queensland. They have sent the majority of their herd to the slaughterhouse. They've kept, I think he said, 8 breeders last night, but that's about it. And one of his arguments, one of the things he's most upset about is when there has been 2 10-cent increases in the price of milk that the big supermarkets said would go to dairy farmers. In the first 10-cent increase, he got $1.4 cents, and in the second 10-cent increase, he's got nothing. Here's what he had to say last night.
And what is the government's agenda? Like, seriously, you've got this fund somewhere, and we're not going to see it till July next year? Like, there's guys around me who are hanging on by their bare scrimp of their teeth, and they're about 2 weeks away from sending all their cows to the abattoir, and as the guys that have put his price on the market the other day, all because the price of milk.
Oh, we're running 2 issues there together, the price of milk, but obviously commitments by supermarkets, and also this drought fund that, you know, he's quite right, doesn't start until July next year. What are the Nats saying inside the party room? Because I don't suspect your constituents think this is good enough.
Oh, Peter, as you know, I can't make comments on party room discussions, but what I can say is I'm with him around divestiture. I mean, I still think that we should have a nation economy-wide divestiture rule. The big stick laws are solely targeted at the electricity industry. But we know that Coles and Woolworths have had practices in the past, and clearly they still have now, which have been detrimental to our producers. I mean, that's just pure profit gouging. I'm no friend of the big supermarkets. I never have been. But in terms of the drought, it's obviously driven up feed prices, particularly grain, because of the shortage. I've got similar issues in the sugar industry. They can't afford to pay their power bills, so they could put water onto their crop, which gives them more production. Across the board, we just need to act. The people I talk to, the people who are affected, they're tired of finger pointing. They're tired of us fighting between us and the states. They just want action. And I think everything has to be on the table to ensure that we deliver what they need.
OK, but please, Keith, you've been in government now for 6 odd years, and you've certainly been in government all the way through the worst of this last drought. Yes, you won the election, and I know that takes your eye off the ball when you're running around trying to win a campaign at the front end of the year, but that was May. We're now in October. What are you going to do about milk prices? Because the point he makes, if there's been a 20-cent increase in the cost of milk to the consumer, and I stand there when people buy milk, they're hunting for the brand that wants to look after farmers. I think the consumers have got their heart in the right place. Now, he says out of that 20 cents, he got 1.4 cents, and because of that, he's gone to the wall. What's going to happen?
Oh, I'm sure there's a combination of circumstances. But it is consumer driven. If I can say to every one of your viewers, make that decision that you've just spoken about. Make sure you buy the product which is supporting our local dairy farmers. But at a federal level, once again,
hang on, Keith. I'm telling you, they are doing that, and he is making the point that milk's gone up 20 cents on a promise of the 20 cents in full going to dairy farmers. He's had 1.4 cents of that 20 cents go his way. It must go to supermarket profits, the rest of it, I don't know. But why is it his fault? He's been farming for 60 years. Why is it his fault? Why can't government or someone do something here so that the 20 cents, I'm not saying change the market, but there's 20 cents there that's supposed to go to the dairy farmer. Why aren't they getting the 20 cents?
Oh, well, it is very clearly it's profit taking, it's profit gouging. It's not in their interests. I absolutely feel for him. I've been involved in agriculture most of my life. But in terms of what we can do, in my view, it is divestiture laws, so we can finally give someone a big stick right across the economy that can bust up supermarket chains who have a monopoly over the purchasing agreements from our local growers. In terms of a solution in the short term, there just isn't one. It is a terrible situation for them to be in. I've seen it happen across a range of industries, carrot producers, people who produce tomatoes, who have been put to the wall by major supermarkets. I agree it has to stop, but as you know, we need to have the numbers in the parliament to produce those outcomes. Now, I've been pretty vocal, I'd like to say, or like to think, about this issue. The Nationals have a policy of divestiture across the economy, but we've got to get in and fight for that outcome, because we will have more people like these farmers, who lose their properties across a period of time if we don't act.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave it there, but I have to say the first supermarket that brands its milk to say that 20 cents in full is going to dairy farmers will be deluged with people, because I know consumers want to do the right thing, but there's not much faith with the big three supermarkets. Keith Pitt, thanks very much for your time tonight.